I did the slide at the beginning, went through the reasons why, why did it happen, and the people involved, which is really the nuts and bolts of what they need to remember. And I think they're going to get that, it happened, fear of growing communism, the Soviets were gaining power, and there's more other lessons around that will help reinforce that. We're going to do another lesson next class about the arms race and nuclear power in that way. Understanding sort of who is involved, I think we've hit that pretty hard. HUAC is on the side. Remembering Nixon's in HUAC is a nice tidbit, but knowing McCarthy is sort of essential. So I'm pretty sure we talked about that enough times that they'll remember. And then there's the homework that supports that too. So. It's like the bookends thing. Because it's an activity that's not strictly about McCarthy, you're going to learn about McCarthy. Here we did this thing, and do you notice you learned about McCarthy, right? So, like anytime you're going to do like this sort of an activity, and I've done this with creating monopolies in the steel industry with Carnegie and other role plays like this, I always try to set it up. We're going to do an activity, and you're going to learn about, McCarthyism and the Red Scare, why it happened and who's involved. Then we do the whole thing, we discuss it, and now you learned about, you notice how this connects to, So to me, it's like a bookends idea. Well, we'll do classroom setup first. It's really important that everyone can see, and they see each other. When they're in rows, it doesn't work out very well. So I like the setup. The setup also gives me lots of space, so we can walk around, which is important for this activity and then others that I've done. Organization. I was a bit disorganized today because we're having the lunch that was going on. Usually I prefer to write up the little cards that say red and green beforehand, but I was doing it the last minute this time, so that's something to think about next time, maybe plan ahead. But just having the PowerPoint ready to go. Actually, I had done this not that long ago with my 10th graders where I do have some students from China who really don't speak a lot of English. And so I'd added those slides with the translations of the directions, and I'd forgotten they were in there. So I rolled that out, and all of a sudden there was Chinese on the screen, and I was as surprised as they were that it was there. So perhaps I need to make 2 versions of the PowerPoint. But I should have said ahead of time that you need to not shove each other around. I forgot that this group gets kind of rambunctious in a way, or excited about something, and then there was a little pushing, so I had to go walk over there just to kind of make sure it was going to settle down and not actually hurt anyone's real friendships. So I should have taken care of that ahead of time. I could have just stopped it without having to deal with it later. In terms of the management, some of the kids, I noticed there was one group where the girl brought her other homework. And she was sitting there reading or studying for probably a test that she has next class. And she kind of halfway did the activity. She got a group. She was okay. She was done. And then, so that was the first group that I went to try and instigate some trouble so that she would kind of refocus on what we were doing. Then there are other groups. I usually try to, in this activity, I go to the groups that are checking out first and try to get things going, discuss it with them, make sure at least that they've thought about what I want them to think about, even if they're done and they're settled and they're not going to change, to make sure at least they've got the cognitive part settled, while the other groups are still fighting amongst themselves about who's in and who's out and that kind of thing. Pretty good. I was a little worried during the discussion time because I noticed some students were starting to fade. Some are really into it and they want to share. Some are a little less so, which is why I kept going back to the cards, because I want them to know, like, hey, everyone's going to stay, still be involved. Even though certain people want to share a lot, and that's okay, they're not the only ones who get to share. Otherwise, real quickly, it's a class of 10 people instead of 30. So.
And how do you think students found the poem engaging?
It was more than I thought it was going to be, actually. I never know quite who I'm going to get for readers, because I pull cards. And the first reader, he was a little slow about it, and that happens sometimes. it is what it is. So that's why I stop periodically and I'll ask questions, or I told them to underline or highlight because it just keeps getting them, coming back to it. I tried at the end, more than before, I tried to ask more open-ended questions. What do you think about that? Instead of, how does this relate to McCarthy or something where, I do want them to get that in the end, and they did. They did come around to that. But I think when it's more open, they're more engaged in it, they're more interested. I felt a little bad. There was one girl who kept offering suggestions, but she's been sick for like a week and a half. And so other kids were getting things because they'd been in class. They were seeing the connections more readily, and I think she was a little bit embarrassed by it. So I wanted to make to, validate, you're right in this way, and instead of saying you're wrong, and then get somebody else to add the other component to it. But I mean, she was clearly engaged in the poem, so that was good. And they seemed to find some relevance that I wasn't always picking out. I mean, some of them are engaged in the campaign right now, so they see the Trump connection. But the whole business about they don't want to play whatever the band director wants them to play or something, and the idea like, oh, we could all stand up to her and get something different, that was totally beyond what I was expecting, right? So very good for them, and maybe a third of this class is in band, so they totally got the analogy. That was great. Those guys will remember this way beyond the test in May, so that's good. I think I need to add more pictures to the slide because we talk about the historical examples, but instead of having just one list on a slide, I think maybe I would make like a separate slide for each one with pictures. The visual will help the kids remember or think about who it is. Like the McCarthy holding up the paper is an important visual that probably some of these guys are going to forget that over time. They'll forget what he looked like, or they may forget that he did the famous speech with the paper and he said, here, I have this list. Even if they remember correctly, the idea of McCarthy and McCarthyism. So seeing that with the words and talking about it and relating it to the experience they did will be really important, I think. So that's something that I could do. I think, like I said before, the directions need to get smoothed out a little bit. It's a little chunky. It's a little slow starting. And I got to figure out some other way to get the names out to them. It takes too long for me to walk around the room. I don't know how else I can do it. I got to work on that. So.